Seems like a while since we've had class. We welcome everyone to class today. So we'll pray, ask God to lead us today, and we'll get into our lesson today. It's called Decision Making, and I will be using notes from the little notebook we gave you. Yes, Callum has it here. Yes. So does Elizabeth. You can follow that along, and I'm just going to be highlighting material. So those who are watching later, those who are watching live, if you want to get out your little notebook, because this lesson has some incredible hints on decision-making process. It's chapter 5 is what we're going to be looking at. Mine is on page 20, chapter 5. And I really encourage you, especially dealing with leadership, and there's some basic tools you can use here across the board in decision making that can really help you to make wiser decisions or better decisions, when to know and when not to make decisions, etc. So we'll pray and get into our lesson today. Thank you for this day. Thank you for each life that is here, each life, Lord, that is watching, observing. We pray your continual great grace and strength to be upon each one. Thank you for what you're doing in each of us. Thank you for your investment, Lord, in our lives, not only in salvation, but being involved in your kingdom some way. So lead us today. Help us to grow, to be better, to develop more in what you have in store for us. In Jesus' name. Amen. Now, in some of these areas we're going through, you may feel you're not on the level as of yet, or may not be in decision-making process, but we all make decisions every day. We decide whether to get up out of bed, to stay in bed. We decide whether to have tea or coffee. There's things that we make decisions on. But there are some times that we are faced with decisions that we need to step back, look at, work through, walk through. And I hope today this process, and you can keep referring to it in your book, will help and also clarify and give some direction. And you can get a handle on this to where when you start making a decision-making process, this just starts coming to you. It's like in the morning, you have a routine. You know, when you get up out of bed, this is what you'll do, this is the next thing. Or when you're going to go shopping, there may be a structure you have set up where you're going, when you're going, you know, and so forth. So when you are involved in leadership, there is decisions that will have to be made. And can I say, when you are in leadership, that you'll have to make decisions that not only affect you, but will affect others around you. And a good way to start learning that sometimes is even in the home, how things not only affect you, but others around you. There are some principles on page 20 in the very first paragraph. There are some principles that you can use that can help you to make sound decisions, even quickly, if need be. Now, these principles are this: ask questions first, then give answers. Ask questions first, then give answers. Classify your problem and be systematic in your approach to the problem. Now, this may sound like, wow, but you can get a handle on this to where it just becomes ask questions, okay, and you begin to work out the approach, what may need or may not need to be done. Now, the more questions you ask, the more likely you are able to give a rational answer and directions. So the more. Now, some people are very good at asking questions. My wife is incredible at asking questions. There's other people that are that way. But if you're in leadership, to ask questions, you are more informed on the decision that you're going to be having to make. And not only asking questions if there's more than one person involved, but to other people involved. When you're a parent and something goes a little sideways in the hole, and you're trying to find out who did what, and there's more than one child in the house. When you have one kid in the house, it's easy to know. But when you have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 kids in the house, as a parent, you begin to work out right away. When something happens, you begin to ask questions. And who did what, when they did it, why, where were you when this happened? Do you have proof that you were there when this happened? So you learn some of these things already. So the more questions you ask, the better you are in giving a good answer. Now, basic things, we've covered this. These are some good things to ask. Who, what, when, where, and how, and especially why. Now these are 6 if I can count correctly. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. Who, what, when, where. I've got the how and the why backwards, but they're in there. Okay. Those are the 6 things. Now, you need to have at least 4 of these answers of the 6 to make a good evaluation or to give a good answer. Who did this? Why did they do it? When was it done? You learn. So these are just some basic, these are things I have used a lot, not only in the decision-making process, but in doing things. Who's going to do it? When are they going to do it? Where are we going to have it? How are we going to have it? These are things, and believe it or not, these are things you already know. It's just like sometimes we have something that we don't realize the value of it, or we have the ability to do it, and you do. And sometimes in these areas we say, I don't have the ability. You have the skills, and developing the skill set, but also you have the knowledge. So these are things: who, what, when, where, why, and how. Now, guidelines for classifying problems, okay, in decision-making process, following the notes. Is it up to you to handle the problem, or is it for someone else? If you're in a structured system, are you in the chain of command to determine what needs or not needs to be done? And I'll review this. Is there tension? Are there hard feelings? When these things kind of come in, is it going to go to the wrong person to make the decision? Resist the temptation to make and handle situations that others are directed or mandated to handle. Always be careful. If it, there are sometimes people will ask me questions, or can a decision be made? And I will say, you're asking the wrong person. This is who you need to see. This is who you need to talk about. Or talk to, not talk about, okay? So you need to be asking them. Now sometimes we don't do that because we may not like the answer that may come down the pike. But when you're dealing with something, if I would go to Callum with a problem or a situation, maybe at the church in Edinburgh, and he has his responsibilities, but I come to him with something else, he would say, I'm sorry, Brother Kelly, I'm sorry, Mr. Kelly, I'm sorry, whoever. You need to check with this person because it's their responsibility. Callum could say, oh, I think I can handle this, and I think I know what they would want him to do. And it may be the incorrect decision or the process, and now we've instead of one problem, we may end up with a couple of problems. I realized that when we were really pushing department leaders in the church, I kept stressing, and I think we're there. Pastor Beek has followed the same thing. If there is a situation in a department that arises, you say, well, you're the pastor, senior pastor, or Pastor Beek is the pastor, they should handle everything. Well, not necessarily. And so therefore, if there's an issue in the Sunday school class, and somebody comes to me and begins to talk about an issue that's happening in the Sunday school class, I will first of all say, have you spoken to the teacher? Have you spoken to the person that's in charge of Sunday school? Because they may have already made a decision, but maybe they're trying to get me to make another decision. I've always encouraged that if you are responsible over a department, that's who people need to see first. And then in turn, if they need to see me, they will come to me. Or the two of you, or the three of you can come together. You know, we could come in on Sunday morning and all of a sudden we realize that one of the teachers is not here for a class. And I could say, oh, Callum, you go ahead and fill that class. And when it comes time for the class, the head of the Sunday school department already knew the teacher wasn't going to be there, and they've asked Sharon or Elizabeth to be there. And so Callum and Elizabeth and Sharon arrived, and I'm to teach it. No, pastor said, I'm supposed to teach it. And what do you have? Confusion. All right? So what you have to do is learn that there are just certain things that, you know, if you pass on the responsibility, then the person in charge of that, if they do, need to come to you. Now, that's kind of a very simple way. I have people coming to me asking things about the national work or various things, and I'll say, these are the individuals you need to approach on those matters. All right? Now, let's move on. Okay, let's go down to the third paragraph. If you are following on page 21, and I'm sticking close to this because this is just very basic, but very real, very applicable in decision-making process. When making a decision, consider if this is a new or old problem. The problem may be new to you, but has this been solved before? You can find the old information faster than you can do the original research. Now, is it an old problem or a new problem? Now, I'm going to speak from my vantage point. Being on the general board, I'm the oldest age-wise and longest serving of the general board. And what we find occasionally that happens is that sometimes there is a problem that arises and the board begins to discuss how we're going to handle this. And oftentimes we've come back and said, back in 1991 or back in 1989, were you born by then? Okay. You guys were. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Were you? She's having a think. That's what she is. Anyway, I could say this came up. There was a lot of discussion. The board decided, or it was brought to the ministers, and they decided to do this. And what's really good, this is why if you're ever on a committee and you're asked to take minutes, make sure you take good minutes. Because it's a safeguard. They may say, well, Brother Kelly, all right, so then we go back and we check the minutes. This was discussed. This is already, a decision has already been made. So we come back and say, okay, this is not a new problem. We will convey to them, this was the decision that was made in relation to these matters. Times change, people change, methods change. But some decisions you make on issues are applicable no matter what. But then there are some times that maybe a decision was made, but let's update this because now what we're facing or how we're facing it, there are some different dynamics. You understand what I mean? Okay? So first of all, you're going to run into some things. There are just, you know, when we had dogs, dogs just like to chew on bones. Well, they said it's good for teeth. So, I mean, you know, the dogs would chew on a bone the longest time. They'd gnaw all the meat off of it. And sometimes they would bury the bone. Weeks later, go back and dig that thing up and start chewing on it again. We do that too. There's sometimes we keep digging up things that are settled. Okay. So what you do is you go back and you say, look, we made a decision on this. It was made. And let's stick with that decision. Eh?
It's done and dusted.
Done and dusted. Yes. Yeah. And sometimes that's hard to do because, but, you know, because we all have very strong feelings. And again, let me just say, sometimes when you're making a decision as a leader, you know, you're looking at a bigger picture. It not only maybe deals with you or you, but what is the ramifications beyond all of that? And sometimes we can't see that. there are sometimes decisions are made that affect my ministry by people that are above me. And that decision is made because they have more information and more input about ministers in my level, my criteria, you know what I mean? That overall, this is what we need to do. And all I'm going to do is look at it from my perspective. And sometimes you may not like every decision that's made, and sometimes you're really glad when decisions are made. Now, let's go back. So is it an old or a new problem? We've been here before. If it's old, go back, try to revisit what was decided and what was done. If it's a new problem, then you have to start figuring out the way around and the way through to deal with it. Let's go and be ready to meet possible eventualities with a contingency plan. Okay. Does the problem, okay, so we have a problem. Does the problem need to be solved now? So if somebody's brought to you a situation, does it need to be solved now? Email, text, what is it? What's all the other stuff? Facebook and Twitter, and or sometimes we instantly got to deal with things. And the problem is now I'm going to really date myself again. Remember when they came out with fax machines? The fax machine is. Or you do know that, right? Okay, I didn't know. Right. See,
Even I know.
yeah, when they brought out fax machines, what happened is people, a decision would be made and they'd get a letter, not an email, or a fax. So this is what happened, and immediately people would get on their typewriter and then fax this thing back, and then once it was gone, it was like, oh, I should have thought before I sent that. Okay. So sometimes when you're going to be dealing with a problem, do we need to deal with this now? Does a decision need to be made now? If it does have to be made immediately, make a decision. So, you know, somebody broke their arm. What do we do now? Well, you know, you have to make a decision to get that taken care of. But don't make a decision quickly unless it really is necessary. Take time to get to know the problem. 5 minutes of consideration is better than none. A few minutes of problem identification will produce a more sound decision than one with no consideration. So what they told us, they sent out a note. When receiving communication that does not please you, I'm finishing my fax story now, F-A-X, fax. Please think before you respond, because the only way we could respond then was by mail. And when you mail something, you think more. But when you were faxing something, it was gone. You know, you couldn't reach in the fax machine and pull it back out. You know, and that's it. It was gone. It was transmitted. So that they said, think twice. Read over what you're going to be sending. Allow even somebody else to read something if it's going to be a response to a situation you may not like. Think. Stop. Whatever, count to what? 10? Sometimes you have to count to 20. And when you're counting yet at 1,000, we know you've got an issue. So anyway, no, sorry. Fast decisions can be very, very harmful. They just fly off the handle. Your leadership, you have to be very careful with that. Flying off the handle. So you just have to step back, okay? And you'll be amazed when we start talking about some of these other things. When you get into a decision-making process, you know, no, I'd like to make a decision right now, but I'm only hearing your side of the story. I'm only hearing these 3 things. And before you know it, you're ready to jump in with this is what we need to do. You have to kind of step back and say, thank you. We need to consider this and listen, and then you start the decision-making process. Yeah, looking for a solution or getting other involvement. Problem solving by an organized approach will take a little time at first, but once you try it, it can become a rapid process. Get the facts and the time, gathering the facts, analyze the situation. And sometimes you will find You have to go beyond yourself to others to help you with a situation and getting input. Is the root of the problem people? If people, not facts, are involved, use caution. Make an assessment when you hear both sides. You'll never make an objective decision if you are emotionally involved. If your conclusion involves people, always count to 10. Think of yourself. When you are making a decision for somebody else, how would I handle this? What would my response going to be? Count to 10. You can get into trouble faster with snap judgment in the area of human relations than in any other decision. So, if somebody comes up here and says, we need to make a decision, do we put a bar across here to help keep all of my notes, or no? And we say, let's make a decision to put a bar across here. We pound a few nails. This little thing is not going to be, that hurts, no, I don't want a bar there. Okay? When you make decisions that deal with just things, do we paint the walls green or blue or something? But when you make decisions that affect people and their emotions, you need to be very, very careful. And sometimes in the height of emotion, you may be ready to make the decision, but for the person or people involved, you may know you need to delay for a while. You may not even let them know, I know what I need to do, but I want to wait. You say, let's settle this for a few days. Because people's feelings can be running very, very high. If you feel a strong tide of emotion, you should put the decision off until tomorrow in order to qualify yourself. If the assessment you make will affect people, remember, it could upset the whole congregation. Be aware of this problem when dealing with people problem. There's people problem and there's things problem. Okay. So sometimes we say there's people problem and church problems. And when there's people, it can get very, very emotionally intense. It really can. You see, I don't think sometimes we appreciate our walk with God is based on faith in the Word of God. We're grounded in the Word of God. But our emotions do run high. We worship, we receive the Holy Ghost. There's a lot of excitement, zeal, and enthusiasm. And so all of that sometimes too awakens that a lot more of our emotions in us. And sometimes when we begin to deal with problems or situations, and I'm not trying to be philosophical here, it gets a little more challenging as well. Also, when you deal with the church and decision-making process, you deal with people who come from various backgrounds, all kinds of backgrounds, age dynamics, cultural differences, and I'm not even talking about other countries. Even within a country, there's cultural differences. Some that have and some that have not. Some that excel and some are just happy to be moderate. Some that come from single-parent families. Some that come from, they don't even know who their parents are. Some that come from where there's a mom and a dad and the children. There is a whole mixture. I often tell people at times, I said, I don't think sometimes we appreciate the grace of God that's at work. When you step back and see the various walks of life and where all of us come from, and we can come together in some sense of order and worship God and have a move of the Spirit and hear God speak to us and touch other lives is an incredible miracle in and of itself. It really is. And sometimes we forget the diversity of us. And even in diversity of a home, we're in a home. In this home, this is what the children did and the parents. In this home, this is what the children did and their parents. It could be totally opposite. Their values and thinking of life. But you bring all of that together. And sometimes we say, what's your problem? Well, we were just all brought up We really go on this, yeah, we go on this thing a lot about we're all snowflakes, well, not snowflakes, but you know how we're all different, but then we want everybody to be like us. We're just different. We are. And so when you get into this decision-making process, dealing with people, a lot of diversity, and we can be, nobody in this room, but there are people that are very strongly opinionated, and they're very good at it. But you have to learn how, in the broadness of everything, this is a decision that has to be made. And sometimes even though your feelings may run high on a way for a decision to be made, for the greater cause and the greater good, you have to step back. And so, even so be it. That's the direction you need to go. Just sometimes we sing songs, you know, like I've been teasing him here, walked through the other day. We used to sing that song, I'm a new creation. I'm a brand new man. Right? So I looked at the girls and I said, oh, I guess you ladies can't sing this, can you? I'm a new creation, I'm a brand new man. So I got this. Okay? They can't say they're a brand new man. So anyway, but the one thing it kind of, it's all about you, Jesus. It's all about Jesus until my feelings get crossed. It's all about Jesus until the church doesn't do what I want. It's all about Jesus. We're just swinging and swaying, and doves are fluttering everywhere. They did what? Right? Okay? It's funny with us sometimes. Somebody's like, it's all about you, Jesus. Sorry, I'm being facetious right now. But I'm just talking about the decision-making process, if you're involved. And one of the challenging things of people learning in church leadership is this area right here. Putting up with people's responses sometimes, when it's good, bad, or indifferent. It's a challenge. And you have to be very careful in the situations. You don't become partial. And thank God, what really helps us in a lot of decision-making processes is because of what the Lord says as well. Now, I know God's not going to be involved too much about whether we paint that wall black or blue or purple. I think He could care less. But those things can become very emotive as well. We know we have the Word of God. This is God's Word. It's not a matter of how I feel, how emotive I feel, my perception. This is how I think, or this. It's the Word of God. Okay. So that helps with the decision-making process. But there are times you have to make decisions that, yes, are based. You want to make things biblically sound, but deal with some circumstances or situations. This is the best way forward with this. So that's why you want to get as much information together, think about it, process it, and before you move forward. Develop a systematic approach for all problem solving. There are several things you can do in approaching the solutions for all problems. Isn't that great? So you come to class today? And there are several things you can do in approaching the solutions for all problems. You can go write a book after this. First, list all the symptoms. Brother Francis, who's been here teaching, he's very good at this. What we will do in our board meetings at times is something arises where we have to make a decision. If he doesn't do this, I'll be shocked. He'll just take a piece of scrap paper or something, turn it over and start. Okay, he'll go right down the middle and make a line. Okay, what's the pros? And what's the con? Who is this going to affect? And you just start slowly writing things down. You will make a better decision if you write things down in this verbiage instead of just verbiage. You really will. You will think more clearly. Because a lot of times when we're speaking, it's just out of emotion. Just, because that's us. It's not like it's exclusive to certain people. It's that way. You forget things. And so when you start listing things, I felt that's a bit of a top me feeling like that. You know, when you start writing things down, also when we're going to be dealing with a situation. Somebody came into class today and said, okay, we need to make a decision on this, and we're part of that process of making the decision. Okay, all right. If we go this way, what is the good thing about it? What's the negative? You start weighing out. Then once you get that, you start working through it. Okay? So that's the first thing you want to do is list all the symptoms or get all the facts. Sometimes the evidence will only be indicators of the real problem. Write them down, but don't decide yet. In a problem-solving meeting, create a permissive atmosphere. By that, if you're in an area where you're having to make a decision, create an atmosphere that people are able to express what they think or feel. Now, as that individual, I have the right to be able to, I don't like to use that term, I've been given the opportunity to express how I feel, but I must be respectful in that as well. So Mary Ann is leading this decision-making process, the committee, and this thing's been brought to us, and she's opened it up for us to say, and I just let it rip. First of all, as a person leading the meeting, she could say, this is not how we discuss things like this.
It's not just in church as well. I used to be, sorry,
That's all right.
an ex-church steward.
A what?
Ex-church steward.
Oh, okay.
And I had to deal with people and management at the same time.
Mhm.
So you've got to go in there, you've got to calm everything, even if it gets heated, you need to calm it down.
Mhm.
And maybe even go out and calm down, have a cup of tea or whatever, and then come back in.
Yeah.
Once it's calm, then you can get things done.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean those things aren't emotive, but it's hard to really think clearly when it's like that. That's why they tell you in correcting a child, never do it when you're angry, because you'll go beyond what you should usually. So it is with these things, you get into a situation where it's just everybody's just, and when you're done, you've created more problems as a result of not, let's sit down. And if it means, like I said, we got to take 10, okay, let's break for lunch, come back, we're not ready to move forward.
Do you know what that made me think of actually? There was a few weeks ago that I had something crazy going on, and I knew God was saying, no, don't, just leave it. But I wanted to, and I knew that it was Him that was saying, just leave it. But actually, I kind of overstepped the mark and I made a decision that I knew that I shouldn't, and it was just because of emotion. And basically everything went upside down. And when I was praying after it, the thought that what came to my head was emotions, the consequences last longer than emotions. And I thought that's a lesson for the future, because what I did left with consequences, but my emotions died down, and then I had to deal with the consequences.
Yeah.
So you ended
In my
up
wrong
having,
decisions.
you had ended up with 3 consequences.
I had ended up with
Yeah.
consequences rather than just the problem, because I let my emotions. The consequences lasted a lot longer than the emotions did.
And you will find too, it's like, I'm just using myself for an example. I've sat on this board, and sometimes something comes up to be discussed. And at the end of the day, the decision that I felt very strong about, maybe ask and give an opinion, even after a lengthy discussion, the decision was made that wasn't like what I wanted. Really learning,